Hi, B. Crit here. Please, watch this little video clip.
I'm part of a group of people with the ability to work together, make sure everybody same opportunities. I want to create a more inclusive and acceptable world for you, and you.
I want to be able to say the same thing about MKP, but I can't. And here's why. I had a meeting back in almost a year ago, June 17th. I had received an email from Lonnie Hamilton, man of color, who was then in charge of the Ethics and Bright Relationships, saying that I was suspended from having access to MKP. We then had a meeting in August. After that, I received an email of recommendation by the lead facilitator of that meeting, Paul Johnson, and I will read to you what he calls the salient points from that lead facilitator. Crit Freeman was asked what he was feeling. After this inquiry, he shut down and appeared to go away, no longer being able to stay present during the process. The progress to go forward with resolution was restricted by Crit Freeman's behavior and his inability to stay connected during the process. The process continued to fragment and spiral off into non-resolution. Clearly, Crit struggles with issues outside of MKP's resolution model, and I acknowledge we are not mental health professionals. So here's a situation of a meeting where men came together with intentions, good intentions to resolve, and yet the lead facilitator issues an email with insinuations that I was going through some sort of mental health breakdown. Luckily for me, I had 3 men of support at that meeting, and men gave their impressions of that meeting. Ted Freeman, who was at that time an area steward for New York Metro, he wrote, and I will quote, "My biggest takeaway, though, was the deep recognition about how political constructs of process, systemic structure, rules, procedures, policies, etc., create a weapon that can be used to silence, shame, force people into line, etc., and further create comfort for those in power to remain safe and protect what they have. Even though all the individual participants were there to make something better, I saw the institution of MKP shrouded in a Byzantine set of rules and structure that boggles my mind. I wondered how a relatively small group of men with little more than time and a desire to help codify and protect our work found the resources to create such an amazingly Byzantine structure and dense set of policies and procedures, and to do so with the sincere desire to keep things safe and to support men." As you can see, that's completely different than what Paul Johnson had put together. Now, Paul Fogarty Johansson was also there. That was Ted Freeman previously. And Paul Fogarty Johansson wrote, "I'd find myself wondering if I was at an entirely different meeting. At the end of our call, we had come to an agreement and resolution. Crit agreed to stop making posts that MKP objected to once he was reinstated. Lonnie agreed to recommend Crit be reinstated the following Tuesday to the E&R circle and then reinstate him on Wednesday if the circle agreed. Lonnie was not willing to make the decision in the moment," at the meeting he means. "Crit was not willing to commit from making objectionable posts until he was reinstated. In effect, the ceasefire date had to be a two-way street. I was in my role as Crit's support on the call. There are errors of fact and perception in this report." And he included that in his email. What I find disturbing in reference, for example, to that intro email, the man states, "inclusive and accessible." And in Paul Johnson's email, making insinuations of a mental health breakdown are not examples of inclusivity and accessibility. Those are examples of an attempt by a person, by an institution, to take a man's alleged wound and to use it against him. That is against the principles and values of this organization, and it is against the laws of our country. The 1964 laws of discrimination, saying we do not discriminate against people with disabilities. In addition to all the efforts that men are making in terms of barrier-free environment within MKP, this statement, so-called recommendation that the facilitators of that meeting, Paul Johnson, Jesse Wardlow, Isaac Monroe, Tim Schlalin, made, their names are all on that so-called recommendation, and the lies they told in that recommendation need to be retracted. I had demanded previously they be retracted, and they refused to do so, and they are indeed lies. And the men who were present at that meeting, such as Judge Maddox, Darrell Hansen, Dan Baldwin, Boyson Hodgson, these men know that what they wrote here is not truth, but not one of them has spoken up and said, hey, that's not true. Remove that, retract that. Not one of them. So I cannot say that MKP is demonstrating inclusivity and accessibility. Here's another thing. When I received the initial email from Lonnie Hamilton back in June 17th, and I will try to show you this. I don't know if I'll be able to, but I will try to bring down the brightness of this screen to see if it will show to you. I think that shows a bit better. It says here, Crit, I just left you a voicemail informing you and following up by email. We are investigating a complaint regarding your recent postings. Pending resolution investigation, we are temporarily suspending your access to MKP Connect and all V groups. This is dated June 17, 2020, so you can see it's almost 1 year to date that I've been suspended from access of MKP Connect and V groups. But it says here, we are investigating a complaint regarding your recent postings. In our American justice system, one is able to face one's accuser. I have no idea who it was who initiated the complaint. They refused to say who it was who initiated it. That's contrary to our American justice system. Randall Marks was the man who was taking notes at that meeting. And I have the email from him stating he'd be taking notes. Several times I've asked for a copy of those notes. He refuses to respond. In our justice system, public trials are public records. Anybody can get a copy of that public record. Here, I was the focus of this meeting. I should be able to get a copy of the minutes, the record, the notes of the meeting. They refused to give me a copy of that. In this case, I was dissatisfied with the meeting they put together, and I communicated my dissatisfaction to them. I then offered to them directly to Dan Baldwin, how about if you and I get together and resolve this? And Dan refused. Also, Paul Fogarty offered to step out of his role of support and to then step into a role as facilitator because he has those skill sets. He does what he calls core values negotiations. Step out of his role as support to me and to negotiate between me and Dan to help resolve this conflict. And again, they refuse. Here's the problem with that. Their refusal. I agreed to meet with them on their efforts, their way, to do things their way. I experienced it and I did not like it. So I made an offer, let's try it this way. And they refuse. Why? I tried it twice their way. Try it once our way, my way, another way. They refuse. Dan Baldwin's running around saying, oh, my little boy doesn't feel safe with you. Well, my little boy did not feel safe with you, Dan, and all these 12 men that you put together. Here's another thing, man. When they put this meeting together, it was advertised right in the subject here, a dialogue with Crit. And I will show you this. It's the email that was sent out by Randy Marks, the dialogue with Crit. And then all of a sudden we get this recommendation from the facilitator. We were never told that Paul Johnson was going to be issuing a recommendation. We were told that he would be facilitating a resolution, not issuing a recommendation. And that certainly was never detailed in any of these emails that they sent out. We disagreed with that he and his facilitators were in an adjudicating position. Now, they put in here that they had using an MKP resolution model. I'm going to go through this here. The progress to go forward resolution was restricted by Crit Freeman's behavior and his inability to stay connected during the process. That's an out-and-out lie. What happened is that after about a quarter of the meeting, I said, all right, everybody, just hold it. Now, you guys let me do the talking because we're not achieving any clarity here. And then I went back to Dan Baldwin's his beginning statement, and I clarified on that, why I was doing what I was doing, what my intended results were, what I achieved, and what it was all about. And what it was about was dealing with safety in circles, that is, violence and threats of violence within MKP's circles, and how I had been challenging that for 3 years within MKP, and finally, after 3 years, MKP chose to put in a safer circle policy. But that's what I had been doing for 3 years, and that's why I stopped the process and I said, hold on, you guys let me do the talking because we're not achieving any clarity. When I said that, one of the facilitators, named Isaac Monroe, he spoke up and he said, well, I have a question for the institution. Why did it take 3 years to put this policy in place? And Dan Baldwin attempted to answer by saying, well, Julian Devereaux decided to go along with what had been said in the past, meaning the organization resisted addressing violence and threats of violence in their circles. Later on, that same facilitator, Isaac Monroe, said, well, this is like a small microcosm of what's going on in society. None of what he said is in the salient points that Paul Johnson put out. Of course not. They're not going to put out anything that perhaps might make me look good and might make them look bad. That is a lack of honesty. That is a lack of telling the truth, along with the lies that were stated. Clearly, Crit struggles with issues outside of MKP's resolution model. MKP did not have a resolution model. MKP did not have a resolution model until it finally came out with its conflict resolution workshop. Then MKP finally had a resolution model. A clearing model is not a conflict resolution model. A clearing model is an individual working on himself model, but it is not a conflict resolution model. MKP did not have a resolution model before. What it had was a jumble of nonsense. Now, here's some of the main points that we need to understand here. What I wanted to meet, how this all started was I wanted to meet with the board, and the board did not respond in wanting to meet with me. So I made some posts, social media, meaning Facebook and Instagram. And one of the posts I made, and I'll show it to you, happened to do with this. And this was a, sorry about that, this was a presentation that Mankind Project decided to present by a fellow named James Nowen, who I believe he put out the book, The Purpose-Driven Millionaire. And in my impression, in my judgment, in my opinion, it was inappropriate to have this particular presentation after the George Floyd tragedy slash murder. There's nothing wrong with his presentation and what he was indeed presenting. The reason I felt it was wrong was that this and what he's presenting has nothing to do with what is going on in society between the dominant culture and non-dominant cultures. This is all about individual healing. That is not what's going on and what was a cause for what happened to George Floyd. That's why I wanted to meet with the board and say, hey, you're going into the wrong direction here. But they did not want to meet with me. What I was trying to emphasize to them was simply no justice, no peace. You hear that mantra in many, many, many protests. Obviously, what do people of color want? Justice. And what I always ask people, is there justice in MKP? And the answer I say, what I'm experiencing, what others are experiencing, is no, there's not justice. How can there be justice when a facilitator puts out a recommendation that's full of lies and nobody, not in the board, not in the ethics committee, says, hey, that's wrong, retract that? How can there be justice? There can't be. How can there be justice when there is nobody who is trained on conflict resolution? Nobody was. There can't be. You have people that don't have the skill sets to properly assess, evaluate, and conclude, and to do the right thing. So what do? They react from their wounds, from their shadows. That is why you see a lot of no justice, no peace. Here's the interesting paradox at MKP. It then has this unpacking of power, privilege, and difference. MKP is not unpacking. It is not unpacking power, privilege, and difference. What it's doing is creating models of, it is not creating, it is continuing and emphasizing models of how it wants people to show up. Specifically, how it wants men of color to show up. It wants men of color to show up as one of them. One of them that they can control, one of them that has the thoughts that they want, one of them that follows their mantra. Sorry, MKP, I am not your Negro. I am not the one that's going to show up the way you want me to. I think my thoughts, I evaluate things, and I decide if they're right or wrong based upon the value set that my parents taught me. I did not come to MKP for an increase or understanding of honesty or integrity. My parents taught me that. However, MKP wants classism. I was in a difference one time with a man, MKP, a higher up at that time. His name was Michael Greenwald, and he did an act of exclusion toward me. A couple of years later after that, he was apologizing. In an apology, he was sharing his thoughts. This was on the leader body list, and he wrote, one of the thoughts he had was he thought that I was not a black enough black man. Yes, classism. In other words, within MKP, there are the good enoughs and the not good enoughs. So I'm the not black enough black man, whereas in MKP, there are the black enough black men. And who are those? They are the James McClearys, the Jim Mitchells, the Bud Wheelers, the Baradages, the Troy Hardens, the Phil Beverleys. They are all the good enough black men, and I'm one of the not good enough. So MKP is maintaining and encouraging its racial classism. It is maintaining and encouraging its racial classism, and what it is not doing is so-called unpacking power, privilege, and difference. This is a farce. This is an imagining. This is an illusion. This is being wrapped up, attending this class is being wrapped up in the lies and illusions that are being presented by the people in power. Sorry, Henry. Sorry, Rick. There's no truth in this. How can there be when I'm going through what I'm going? When there's no retraction, when there's all these lies. By Dan Baldwin. Ed Gurewitz was at that meeting. He knows that what was presented here was lies. Richard Torres was at that meeting. He knows what was presented by that recommendation was lies. Ed Gurewitz is your intercultural advocate? Really? Is he unpacking power, privilege, and difference? No, he is not. He is supporting the power. He is supporting the privilege. Richard Torres is supporting the power. He is supporting the privilege. What this really is all about, when it comes to the bottom line, is Dan Baldwin. Dan Baldwin feels threatened by me. Why? Because I involved myself in the conflict that had been going on in Greater Carolinas, in which a man was being threatened by another man. In that community, the man who had been the perpetrator was an indigenous man who was making threats against a white man. That community did not want to hold the indigenous man accountable. Why? Because they were in the, oh, we feel so sorry, so bad for indigenous guys. No. No man has any right to do violence or make threats of violence in our circles, period. No man has any right. I don't care what your skin pigmentation is. You do not have any right to do that. And the man should have been told that. So I intervened by sending out emails. Yes, I have no problem telling you I broke the EULA. I sent out emails to as many men as I could in that community, stating safety is paramount in our circles. Threats of violence are inappropriate. They should never be occurring. And an example of what a man can say in situations like that. Surprisingly, I got phone calls from both men, Gabe Peltier and Phoenix Bartolos. And I encouraged Phoenix to go ahead and file an official complaint. And again, Dan Baldwin did not like the fact that I chose to intervene. Tough. He does not get to say what I do and not do. He does not get to say what I can speak my mind on and what I can't. I believe firmly in freedom of speech. And no one's going to take my right to freedom of speech away. Unfortunately, there are those in MKP who do not believe in freedom of speech. Tough. That's because they really and truly don't believe in unpacking power, privilege, and difference. You take away freedom of speech, you're giving people power. You're encouraging classism. You're encouraging, you're maintaining, well, there's the good enoughs and the not good enoughs. Again, sorry, Henry, sorry, Rick. This is not going to work. That's an illusion. And it's an illusion being maintained board of directors and by the curriculum instructors of MKP. Now, the bottom line again is always, is there justice in MKP? No, there is not. So to go back to the beginning, accessibility, inclusivity. I wish I could say that about MKP. I want to say that about MKP. I can't say that right now. No communication from anyone. I'm not able to face my accuser. There are incredible lies that are being told no retractions, breaking federal laws by making these accusations that are contrary to the 1964 anti-discrimination laws, refusing to give me notes of the meeting. Again, that is not how our American justice system works. And when we make an offer, 2 different offers, a resolution, them not even saying, well, let's try it. I tried their offers 2 times. Didn't work. Didn't like it. They could at least have tried our offer 1 time. What was stopping them from trying it? Absolutely nothing. Other than their desire to have it their way. Power. They're not able to unpack their power. Dan Baldwin's the crux of all this, unfortunately, and he's being encouraged and enabled by the board of directors. So, I am going to say to everyone again, I am not your Negro. Lastly, I'm obviously not the only man who has gone through this or is going through this. An indigenous man who's going through this. And what is surprising me is that why aren't there the other indigenous men in MKP standing up and demanding that this man be treated fairly? In my case, the paradox is the men who have stood up for me and defended me have all been so-called white. There has not been one black man who stood up and defended me publicly. And that is the weird paradox to be in. In fact, one of those men, Paul Fogarty Johansson, received an email from a black man named Judge Maddox, and Judge said to Paul, "The fact that you are defending Mr. Freeman is reason for us to not want to have anything to do with you." That is contrary to the mission of MKP about resolving conflicts peacefully, and it is contrary to what we do in this work. That's where we are. That is MKP. It is not yet at the point of learning and understanding and working to resolution with conflicts. It is not at the point of truly understanding differences. And I don't think it will ever be at this point of being able to unpack power, privilege, and difference. Thank you. Thank you for listening. Thank you for sharing. I am not your Negro, MKP, and I never will be.